Hello, my name is Dubim. I think a lot of people will be asking why don't I just call myself a full stack developer? But I'm still gonna stick to call myself a front end developer who codes backend and design for a while. So today is gonna be an interesting one. I'm gonna be doing a comparison or showing you the similarities between front end and backend using a diagram. We're not doing any code for now. But I just want to let you know that like they are similar to an extent. Essentially, they facilitate giving a user or an entity access to a particular resource, right? So join me. The goal or the objective is basically to encourage you to explore other areas, right? Don't just stick to front end and never check back end, or don't stick to back end and never check front end. So let's get in. So I opened up a fig jam here. Let me close this from my previous video. So like I said, it's all about getting a user to a particular resource, right? So we're going to start by doing a little label here. So front end and then back end, right? So at every point we have a user, right? So I'm just gonna use this as a user. Okay, let's just ignore this for now. So just gonna draw out a user. What's up with my I'm not sure why this tool is acting up today. So yeah, so first we're starting with a user, right? So in the front end, right, the user actually first goes to a location to get or to begin their process to get the data, right? So, and for the back end, they also go somewhere. So for the front end, we go to an interface, right? An interface, a UI. In the back end, the user goes to an API, right? Now, this interface like has an address or an address system which we usually get to land, like aside the domain name, right? This when you get to the when you use the domain name, right, whether it be it apis.yourdomain.com or yourdomain.com, there's a particular address in that particular server or location that might point to the particular resource you're looking for, right? So in this case, the interface, right, belongs to let's just even label that. So let's say this is my app.com, or let's even say dashboard.myapp.com, and then the location they get to here would be api.myapp.com. Right. Now, mind you, the front end communicates with the back end, right? Really, the front end actually passes on the user to the back end, but we'll see how that works. We just want to discuss similarities. Right. So now the address system is what in the front end you call the page, or mobile you call the screen. So it's going to be something like, let's say you want to get files, right? So let's say we have to go to the page files to get it, and even in that page it might be leaving a particular component and all that. So we get to the files page. Let's just say page, and in terms of backend it's called routes. Let's see, API version 1/files. Let's say this is where it lives, right? So even though you've gotten to the address, right, you need a key. You need a key, and most times, like, there are different kinds of keys that one needs, right? So we're in the address, but we need a key. So there can be different kind of key. So one of the first keys can be your identity. Like, are you a guest or are you a user, right? So in case of backend, it's checking your token. Are you a user? What claims do you have? What roles do you have, and all that? So identity first. Are you identity? Are you a user or a guest? Right. So this is basically the keys. The first step, like, who are you? Like, who are you? Right. Um, who are you? Then the next one is could be and who are you is basically from what you have, like your token and all that. So it dives further into um what's it called? Who you are, like after knowing that you're a user, right? You can now check what you have, like let's say your your permissions, you know, and all that. So primarily your identity and the permissions you have is what grants you access. Let me just take this off. Just embed it here. Make this a bit cleaner. All right, for permissions, it could be create, delete. So usually the name of like the permission is kind of like key that usually would contain maybe the name of the module and the action you're trying to do, right? So most times stored in the database, or some people store in the token as well. Mhm. So yeah, this is the key. You need a key that can open the door, right? If not, you get bounced away. So there's somebody who is attending to, or would I say the lock, right? Where you actually have to insert the key when you get to the location, right? So um that is what we usually call the handler. Some people call it handler or controller. So let me just even call it the handler. Or before that, let me just interject a bit. So there's an action usually. So let me be sure that I'm recording. There's an action you want to perform, even though you're in that address. So for files, you want to do a list. You want to get a list of files. So that's basically the name of the action. Other actions you might want to upload, delete, process, whatever. So let's say list is what you want to do in this case. Let me just add a little bit more resize, um, you know, annotate, maybe you want to generate alt tag or whatever, right? So that could be the action you want to perform. So for that action, you need a key. You need keys, right? So it's checking who you are, and then do you have lists, delete permissions, and all that, right? So now, the route you go to is enough to know like the action you want to perform, right? And it's also enough to know who is the handler. So when those routes don't exist, most times not most times, you should get a fall for telling you that the resource you're trying to get is not. So even remember, even on the back end, you get on the back end, on the front end, you get a fall for, right? So let's say um we hit the endpoint 404, right? So here, this is cases whereby resource is not found. All right. I guess I could make this much more better by using flowchart concepts. Just give me a second. I'm trying to make the video not too long. Whew. Resource exists. No. Let's say route exists. Yeah. Route or address. Let's just say address. So we are checking that the route exists. So nope. What do you do? Return a 404 page, 404 response, whichever one you want to do. Right? So and usually, yeah, we want to do an action, right? We want to do an action. Yeah. But we need to also have a key. We need to have a key, and it could be who we are and then the permissions we hold. So when we get to the handler point, right? When we get to the handler point, funny enough, we don't meet the handler first, right? We shouldn't meet the handler first, at least. We should meet like middlemen that do some checks. So those middlemen is called middlewares, right? So Let's call them middlewares, right? So basically what they do is they're responsible for checking the keys you have. They're responsible for validating the data you're coming from. You could be asking, you'll be sending data in terms of query or request body, right? So it checks to make sure maybe you're not sending too many files, or you're asking for the right things, or you're not trying to manipulate the query. All right. So this middleware basically um, it does checks um, for your key um, data formats, etc. And other checks, you could check for things like expiry, and whatnot. So you do your checks here. So checks or middlewares in the front end can look like, okay, you want to check the user, do they have access to these files? Maybe they're admin files, so they shouldn't be seen in the first place. So you shouldn't limit your checks. I see a lot of apps, they limit their checks to only the front, to only the back end, and then when you get to a particular page, you're not permitted to see it, like it just breaks. That's not the best. Ideally, even if you allow them through in the front end and you want to handle it to the back end, your back end should also return a message that is reasonable to them to understand what's going on. Right. So in the handler or middleware phase, like we need to make another decision or check. So batteries low. So here I want to check if everything um, passes. Check passes. Let's say checks complete. Right. So front end checks, back end checks. So if for some reason it doesn't work out, we should return the proper return. Okay, front end. You show a message post, message notification, or screen. You can show them a screen like instead of loading the data, right? You don't need to load, you don't even need to initiate a backend call. You can just show them like, hey, you don't have a permission to get files, right? And usually the permissions come from the backend when you're initializing the app, like when the person is loading the app, right? So you can just show them a message on the backend. You want to return proper error message and status. So you can check out the status codes, the online. It's very good standard for you to follow the proper status codes. You can also have status codes on front end or error types, basically custom error types that helps you keep your error handling uniform. So after we succeeded the middleware, we get to the handler. So folks also do some checks in the handler, but I pretty much like to make my code modular so I can have a bunch of middlewares as much as I need, especially if they should be reusable. So ideally, you shouldn't be doing too many checks in the handler stage, right? So let's say this is the list handler, right? List handler, and then so at this point where we have the handler, we are going to go get the information or the resource. So for the front end, really, um, the request to backend, and then this one will be request to database or service. So you might not only be interested in a database. Like you might not always want to, in this case of list, most likely want to get from database or from the cache system. Yeah, funny enough, cache is also existing front end and back end too. So we're going to look at that. Right. So I told you like front end and back end, they are too similar, very similar for you not to try out the two. Right. So in the case of front end, we request to the back end. So I could just loop this back. Hope Fig Jam doesn't go crazy. Loop this back here. Let's adjust this. Right. So yeah, so this is where we begin the backend journey, right? So at this point where we are trying to list, you know, so let me just shift this a bit. I want to do something interesting here. So like backends are all about databases anyway. So you might want to hit the cache first. So let me know. Request to backend. So before we even do any request, sorry, I'm messing up these diagrams. Check for cache. So in this case, in the backend, you're checking basically, it could be in a memory or local storage, session storage, etc. It could be in any of those places. So if the cache is still valid, right, you can just return that and you don't need to make a it's funny how like a lot of people don't use caching. Like you could save a lot in terms of server calls. For example, if you're using something like let's say Cloud Run or some of these serverless um, services, right? And then you are charged based on request numbers, or maybe you're using some cloud functions. You want to actually reduce the amount of calls you are making, So I think caching on the front end is something that is very good for you to do. So in terms of backend, you might have memory cache as well, or Redis, and you might even cache in search if you like. All right. Um, so if like the cache is valid, right? Um, you can just return that, right? So check cache presence and validity, right? So usually if all is good with your cache, then you don't need to do much. So makes API call, right? Calls Postgres DB, could be calling Postgres, it could be calling Redis. Might not necessarily only use it as a cache. Yeah, you can use that as a database, but you should just know how you manage that anyway. You might be calling some other service, like let's say, if you have a microservice architecture, you might be calling let's say image resizing service, you might be doing that, or or your search system, like let's say you might have like Elasticsearch or Melissearch or things like that. So you could be doing a bunch of things anyway to get that resource. Remember, it's a resource. The resource could live um in a database or other integrations, e.g., let's say Facebook, you want to get something from their Facebook, Twitter, Google Drive, maybe the files actually live in Google Drive. That's where you want to get it. So the resource might not necessarily be living inside of your database or the app itself. It could be living in a different service. So remember what I said. Primarily, what is involved is facilitating request of a user for a particular resource, right? So that's essentially what uh, is involved in the two, right? And then you can actually go in and flesh this out more. So yeah, mind you, like it goes from left to right, right? So it's not confusing anyway. And for the back end, for the front end, you ideally should go back to um the backend to make a call, but not always the backend anyway. API call to backend or services, e.g., like Algolia, etc. Yeah. All right. So, yep. So this essentially me showing you the similarities between front end and back end, right? So some of these words like middlewares, they're common to see across board, and you could even kind of like maintain conventions across, especially with the rise of full stack frameworks, right? You could maintain a bit of conventions and files and even types, right? So yeah, so just this video just to encourage you to try out a front end if you're a back end dev, or try a back end if you're a front end dev. Um, I hope I'm not missing out anything. You can leave that in comments, share this video, subscribe. I'm happy to have you here. Thanks. Bye.